my name is Taylor Marshall. This is my online observation presentation for exceptional children for Miss Vaughn's classroom. My observations hours were conducted at Miss Petrie's classroom, kindergarten classroom at Sylvan Hills Elementary at 8 o'clock in the morning on April 3rd, 2017. And then I did my first grade observation at Sylvan Hills as well with Miss Anderson's class, and I did this observation from 9 o'clock to 10 o'clock a.m. on April 3rd, 2017. Directly after, I went to Mrs. Peak's second grade classroom at Sylvan Hills Elementary from 10 to 11, and this was also on April 3rd, 2017. And then I went to Mrs. Pig's third grade classroom on April 3rd, 2017 from 11 to noon. After that, I went to Jacksonville Pathfinders, inclusive site for children pre-kindergarten, and it was Miss Larson's classroom at 9:30 a.m. Then I went to Easter Seals at 9:30 a.m. in Miss Louisa's classroom, and Miss Louisa's adult inclusive classroom. And then directly after, I went to Miss Virginia's classroom that had children, and it was an inclusive site for children at Easter Seals as well. And then my inclusive site was Jacksonville Pathfinders Autistic Adult Center from 8:30 to 9:30 a.m. And something that I really thought that my kindergarten class, Miss Petrie's class, my glow for her observation. She went over everything on the projector so that the entire class kind of came together and collaborated with her, asked her questions, and she was really good about answering them. And she worked all the worksheets with them, and she was very helpful for them. She was a very intimidating teacher, though, and that is my growth for her. She kind of gave up this vibe where the students didn't necessarily want to approach her, and when they raised their hands and asked her questions, she would get with them, and she was really good about getting with them and answering their questions. It was just that I heard a lot of students in the back of the class that necessarily didn't want to raise their hand, and I don't know if she was not acting out, she's a teacher, it's her classroom, but I don't know if she was being the way that she was, all nice, and because I was there and I was observing in her classroom, because a lot of the students seemed to be kind of scared of her and didn't want to necessarily ask her any questions. In Miss Anderson's classroom, something that I liked about her, her students loved her. She was very one-on-one with each of her students, very good at keeping everyone on track, and she didn't get upset or frustrated very easily at all. She was just a happy-go-lucky teacher, and something that I thought she could grow on. Her desks were arranged in a manner that could allow her students to easily cheat, and a lot of them did cheat. They were studying for some state tests that they were about to take in the next few days, and a lot of her students I caught cheating while they were doing their practice tests. And I just think if those desks were more separated, she would have an easier way of handling this problem. But anyways, her class was way too small for her to separate those desks like they were. This was at Sylvan Hills Elementary, and the school is kind of outdated and needs to be probably rebuilt, because all the classrooms were extremely small and very unorganized and hard to keep track of where everything was. After I went to Miss Anderson's classroom, I went to Miss Peak's second grade classroom at Sylvan Hills Elementary at 10 o'clock in the morning. This was April 3rd, 2017. Something I really liked about Miss Peak's classroom, it was the first time that I've seen students in the school disciplined, like this teacher had disciplined them. It was a very quiet classroom. As soon as I walked in, I could automatically tell that I wasn't in kindergarten or first grade anymore, because all of the students were much quieter and a lot more tamed, and they were also studying for some state tests that were coming up, and these students just didn't say anything. None of them even said anything to me when I walked in, and this was different compared to other classrooms that I'd been in Sylvan Hills. And so I was really impressed with that. Something that I thought that she could grow on she was also studying for state tests and had her students taking practice tests that were like the exam that they were going to take. Students did cheat. Her classroom was a little bit bigger, but I had a student who was sitting across from me, and he was pretty much just asking his neighbor what the answer to the question was as soon as Miss Peak walked out of the classroom. And the student answered him, and then he looked at me because he didn't know that he was going to get in trouble or not for me knowing that he was going to cheat. And when he kind of saw that I was just watching him and not necessarily an authority figure over him, he asked for another answer. And then I told him that he shouldn't do that, that he should study for the test. And Miss Peak came back in the classroom, and they were done observing, doing their testing material, and so she just moved on. So I just didn't really say anything about it. But that was something that I thought if she needed to grow, she could have like made her students understand that cheating was not okay and it wasn't going to be acceptable in this test. And cheating's not going to get them anywhere anyways, because they're not going to be able to cheat on the test. And if they get caught, they're going to have to retake this test. My third grade observation was done with Miss Pig at Sylvan Hills Elementary at 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. Something I really liked about Miss Pig's classroom, she had this area in the corner of her classroom where there was a watch activity log of some sort, where all the students had different watches and that they could connect to this tablet, and it would log all of the activity that they had done, how many miles they'd walked, how much time they spent running that day. And even the principal of the school came in the middle of my observation and had one of these wristwatches on, and he connected his watch to the watch on the tablet. So it seems like in Miss Pig's classroom, everybody was very interconnected and they were good at collaborating together. Even the principal was in on it, and I thought that was something that was very cool about her classroom. My only grow for her, it was a very cramped classroom. There were multiple students in that class. It was the biggest classroom I had visited so far at Sylvan Hills, and there was just no space in the classroom for anybody to walk. Everything was extremely cramped, and they had a area on the ground where a rug would be, where she had a whiteboard, and she would take up groups of students at a time to teach them some lesson, and each group was a different lesson. And this lesson that I got to see personally off of all the 3 different groups she had was a spelling lesson. And they came and they sat down in this very cramped little space behind a bunch of desks and storage areas, and it was just a very small amount of space. Some students even had to stand because they couldn't sit anywhere, and there wasn't a rug or anything for them to sit on. So that was my only problem with Miss Pig's classroom, is just how extremely cramped it was. But that's just something that Sylvan Hills probably needs to come together and work on, because their school needs to be updated. My next observation was done at Jacksonville Pathfinders pre-kindergarten area in Miss Lawrence's classroom. Something that I very much liked about her classroom, it was that all of the kids loved her, and as many inclusive sites I've been to, all of the kids usually do end up loving their teacher, and they have a very one-on-one personal relationship. But Miss Lawrence was different. She just absolutely adored her job, and you could tell that she loved her job. And she talked to all of the students, and if the students had a problem, they would run right up to her, even though there were other teachers' aides in the classroom, because they all wanted to talk to her because they just loved her. And she was just very good in handling the kids, and it was just a very good experience for me to see a teacher love her job that much. Something that I thought this classroom could grow on, in the middle of my observation, there was a little boy who had bit a girl for trying to close the door when the teacher told her to close the door, and he didn't want the door closed. And he bit her very hard. He broke skin. And the Miss Lawrence had called up to the nurse and had a nurse come down and bring her an ice pack and a bandage. But when the nurse got there, she had asked Miss Lawrence if she was going to file a report on it, because I guess that's something that they consider they want to do highly in their school, is these reports, just to keep up with everybody's actions and things that have personally happened. And to the other students because of their actions, and Miss Lawrence wasn't going to file a report. And the nurse had explained to her that she needs to, and she said, okay, I will. And after the nurse had left, I don't think that Miss Lawrence ended up filing a report. I think she blew it off her shoulder and didn't say anything to anybody about it. So that was something that I thought, if anything, this classroom could grow on, but I am sure that there's a lot more incidents that happen, and if she took the time out of her day to write down every single one of these incidents, it would probably be very time consuming. My next observation was done at Easter Seals in Miss Louise's classroom. Something that I loved about Miss Louise's classroom, they weren't children, it was an adult site. Everybody in the classroom was around the ages from 16 to 18, and some of them were about to transition to their secondary, post-secondary lives. They were going to leave the special needs education altogether, and they were just moving on to bigger and better things because they had come that far in their advancement at Easter Seals that they could do so. And something that I just really liked about her class was that they were learning every second of the day. Every second that I was there, and I stayed there a little bit longer than my hour observation just because they were doing something very interesting and I wanted to stick around. And they were always either on their they were doing something with the computer, or they were collaborating with each other. They were reading a book, and even the students who couldn't read books, the nonverbal students, they still opened up a book for them so that they had the option. They could look down, they could kind of have a feel for what's going on in the classroom so that they're still learning. And there were multiple teacher's aides in this classroom that all focused on a group of students. There were nonverbal students, there were students who were nonverbal but could understand better than the students in the back of the classroom, and then there were students who could read pretty fluently. They had their troubles, but they could read, they could talk, and they interacted with one another, and they sat at the front of the classroom. But the only thing that I think that this classroom could grow on, I don't really have a grow for this classroom because it was just an amazing experience to be at Easter Seals and see how the school runs. If anything, I think that the only thing that this classroom could grow on is maybe a little bit less discipline. Sometimes they seemed a little harsh on the students when they did something wrong. It's even the nonverbal students who I am to understand couldn't understand a whole lot. And if they would throw something on the floor, they would kind of get yelled at a little bit, and I didn't think that was necessarily fair because it's not something that they can necessarily help. My next observation was at Miss Virginia's classroom. This is at Easter Seals from 10:30 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. And it was by far my favorite classroom to observe. Miss Virginia was extremely nice to me. Not only did I get to observe inside her classroom, but she took me around Easter Seals and we walked around quite a bit, and she told me about every single aspect of the whole building and how everything works and the student schedules and how parents come to pay for things. And it was just very interesting to be able to talk to her and learn about all of this different various things that go into making the school run. And it was a lot to take in, really, and I just absolutely loved her. She was something that I really liked about her classroom, and that I had not seen in Miss Louise's classroom at Easter Seals, was when you walked into her class, on the side of the door there was a schedule that she had listed for all of her students, and there was a Velcro strip and some papers that had like speech therapy or physical therapy or snack time, lunchtime, break time written on them, and she would every day write the schedule down for each one of her students, and these were children, and write what they had to do that day, when they had to do it, and she was just very organized in that way, and I really liked that about her classroom, and it wasn't something that I had seen in another classroom like that, because with as many things as they have going on, this is a good way, I feel like, the best way to keep up with all of the different things that these students have to do. And there was only one verbal student in that classroom, and he was actually absent of the day that I observed, so I just saw her and her student teacher's aides try their best to work with these students to teach them different learning activities. They worked on math and some English, kind of, and it was just interesting to see how these students learn. And I really enjoyed working with Miss Virginia in her class. I do not have a grow for her. She was an absolutely terrific teacher. I did not see anything that I could possibly have improved on in her classroom. My last observation was done at Jacksonville Pathfinders Autistic Adult Center. My original observation was supposed to be done at the children adult site, but there was a new student, and there was only 2 students in the class, and the new student was very coming on change from his old school, and I guess he had a lot of behavioral problems that they were still trying to calm down. So she just told me that we would go to the autistic adult site, and I would observe with this teacher, Miss Woolley, who also happens to be a supervisor for the Autistic Jacksonville Pathfinder Center. And she worked closely with this girl named Brianna that she was actually transferring from the children's site to the adult site that day. And Brianna was new to this classroom, and I got to see how somebody new in a classroom environment still would react, and she really enjoyed being there. And it was just an interesting thing to see these autistic adults, how they learn and what they know and what the classroom is doing to help them further their lives. Something that I liked about this is she told me about these different goals that they give the students for their independent education plans every day or every week. And these goals are specifically to help them succeed after the school. And some of the students were working with money, and some of the students were, Brianna was working with, there was only 3 students, but Brianna was working with speech therapy on a tablet because she was nonverbal. But it was just very interesting to see how these autistic people react differently from other people with special needs who need to be put in inclusive sites. And I really liked being in this classroom, and it was very interesting. And I don't have any really grows for them either. If any grows that I did have a grow, I would say that the Miss Woolley spent all of her time with Brianna the entire time of the classroom, and the other teachers aide spent all of her time with those 2 students. And maybe if they collaborated together and not necessarily taught together, because these students don't learn the same, but maybe if they kind of switched roles in teaching who they were teaching, maybe the students could gain some different insight from somebody else. But really, that was the only thing that I noticed. That was everything for my observations. Thank you so much.